Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Sarastro's Oathsworn painting series. In this episode I'll be painting The Witch from Oathsworn into the Deepwood by Shadowborn Games. The Witch has quite an interesting colour palette, including the option for some attractive object source lighting. You can see I chose to include both orange light coming from the lantern and also some blue light from the imagined spell effect in the left hand. However, to keep things simple, you could just focus on rendering the orange light if you like, or stick to a general zenithal lighting scheme instead. Let's begin. As usual, I began by priming the figure in black, and I've also provided some general zenithal highlights, as well as a quick value sketch for the brighter object source lighting for the lantern, just to give me an idea of how I want the light to fall. I've chosen to paint the lantern first, so I can then better judge the strength of the highlights for the rest of the model. So I'm first using some pure white to ensure that the panels are as bright as possible. You can of course use whatever white you like for this, and apply a couple of layers if necessary to ensure the levels are as bright as can be. I'm then mixing a slightly warm off black using a mix of black and titanium grey, and using this to paint the frame of the lantern. Might need to go back and forth a little to neaten things up. I'm now going to paint on the fiery tones using pigments by Hera models. You could use whatever bright yellows and oranges you like, of course. These are just some of the most vibrant and versatile fluorescent tones I've found. The pigments can be thinned with water, medium or matte varnish, and I'm starting with a mix of the yellow and orange light. All I'm aiming to do here is create a slight gradient, getting a little darker and more orange towards the top of the lantern. Here I'm mixing in some of the orange. I'm also placing a little of the orangey tones here at the lower edge too. And I'm now just tidying things up. Next I'm going to highlight the frame of the lantern, and I'm starting by lightening the base tone with some white along with some of the orange pigments. I'm then using this to add a little object source lighting to the rim that sits just above and below the glowing panes. I'm now adding some cooler general highlights by mixing varying amounts of Artic Blue into the base tone. I'm also adding some white to create some brighter highlights for some of the corners and edges, although I'm not going anywhere near pure white in terms of brightness. And here I'm adding a few more touches of object source lighting. I then decided I wanted to create a more aged and tarnished looking finish, so here I'm stippling on some thinned burnt sienna umber. and we can alternate this with some stippled grey tones to create the desired level of texture. Next I'm going to paint the staff, and you could use whatever dark brown tones you like for this. I started with a mix of burnt sienna umber and dark brown ochre. For the area where I want to show light hitting from the lantern, I'm pushing up the values with some vanilla white, loosely blended into the brown. I then decided to apply some of the more translucent earth green to create a little further variation. And here I'm boosting the levels a little further to ensure we achieve a nice bright finish when we apply the orange. I'm now mixing some object source lighting tones, and notice that the pigments can be freely mixed with the acrylic paints. I'm starting off quite orange, and we'll add some more yellowish tones in a moment. The paints can be applied more thinly for blending purposes. This is now the pure orange light pigment. I'm now moving more towards the yellow end of the gradient for the areas that are closest to the lantern. And we can of course return to the dark brown tones to push the light back if needed. I also want to ensure that we emphasise some of the rough texture on the wood. Here I'm just mixing a fairly neutral tone for the general zenithal highlights, but won't be going too bright as I'm after quite a gloomy ambience. I'm now pushing the intensity of the object source lighting a touch further, and the paint can be fairly opaque for this. And I'm once again going back and forth a little until I'm happy with how things look. Next I've chosen to paint the face, where I'm first using a white and vanilla white mix to paint the eyes. I'm now using some pure black to paint the area immediately surrounding the eyes, trimming the whites back as needed, and I'm also placing the pupil in the left eye. I'm now mixing a base skin tone using pink flesh mixed with some burnt sienna umber and a little violet. I'll then be highlighting the skin with a mix of pink flesh and golden flesh. So here I'm mixing my base tone. Notice how I like to leave some fine black lining around the eyes. Before adding the highlights, I'm painting the surrounding hair using black. I'm now mixing the pink and golden flesh colours, and gradually adding this to the base tone to gently build up the highlights. I'm imagining the light falling on the face to be a combination of ambient zenithal light mixed with a directional light coming from the lantern, so I'll be leaving the left side of the face a bit more shadowed. There isn't much room to manoeuvre the brush here, so short strokes and some stippling might be the way to go. I'm now mixing some primary red with the colours I used for the base tone to create a dark reddish hue for the lips. I'm applying this reasonably thinned in a couple of layers. I'm now adding some vanilla white to create a highlight tone for the lower lip. I went a little too bright here, so I'm now going in with a gentler mid-tone. This is now a pure mix of the pink and golden flesh colours. Here I'm using some black to sharpen the left eyebrow. And finally, I'm leaning a little more towards the golden flesh tone for my last few highlights. Next I'm going to highlight the hair by mixing some vanilla white and a little orange into the black. And we can return to the black if needed to help define the strands. I'm now painting the right hand, and if you're not adding the spell effect, you could also paint the left hand too. I'm incorporating some of the orange pigments here as the hand is pretty close to the lantern. Moving on to the outfit, I'm now going to paint the areas of purplish leather using dark violet, which I'm desaturating with some black and some vanilla white. I'm now adding some extra black for the straps on the left leg. And I'm also using this for the lower legs. For the hooded cloak, I'm using red leather as my main midtone. From there, I'll be adding some violet and some black for the shadows. I'll then be using deep red for the general highlights, and Aldeberan Red for the warmer highlights nearer to the lantern, along with some Sahara Yellow to nudge things more towards orange if needed. So here I'm first mixing my shadow tone, which I'm then using to block in the main areas of shadow. I'm working on one section at a time, and I'm then using red leather to paint the rest. For the right shoulder, I'm going to begin adding some Aldeberan Red into the red leather to begin establishing the object source lighting. A second layer might be needed to achieve a solid finish. I'm now adding my deep red to the red leather and using this to provide some slightly cool general highlights to the areas that aren't being hit by the light of the lantern. I'm also continuing to build up the warmer tones on the right side of the figure. And here I'm mixing in some Sahara Yellow to create a more orangey hue for the most prominent areas of object source lighting. I'll be returning to do some more work here in a while. I'm now going to paint the gold looking trim using Naples Yellow mixed with some burnt Sienna Umber. We can also use this for the ornate buckle. And I'm now using earth green for the water bottle as well as the inner shirt or blouse. This is somewhat translucent, so I'll be applying a couple of layers, although I don't need the coverage here to be completely opaque. I'm now painting the left hand using the skin shadow tone. And for the optional blue lighting effect, I'm creating a pale mix of primary blue and white. I want this to be nice and opaque. I'm now using a slightly more bluish mix to paint around the edges. And I'm going even whiter for the centre of the palm. To begin establishing some of the surrounding blue object source lighting, I'm now mixing some of the white and blue into the earth green, and I'm using this to light the left sleeve. I went back and forth a bit here, trying different strengths of blue to see what works, including the addition of some cobalt blue. Before getting stuck into the rest of the highlights, I'm gluing down some additional scenic elements by epic basing. And I'm now brushing over a black primer before throwing on some initial colours, keeping things nice and dark for now. Some earth green and burnt sienna umber will do nicely for the ground. And I'm incorporating colours from the outfit into some of the fungi. I'll be doing some more work here in a while, but just wanted to get a sense of how the whole miniature is coming together before going any further. I'm now going to highlight the purple leather by adding additional vanilla white into the original base colour, along with a hint of both the blue and orange object source lighting tones as needed. So here I'm adding some of the orange pigments as I highlight the right side of the figure. And I'm now creating a more bluish mix for the left side, using the same white and primary blue tones we used for the spell effect. I'm happy to allow things to be a bit sketchy here. I'm gently pushing the saturation of the orange to see what works. Along the way, we can add some black lining to really help boost the sense of depth and definition. I'm now adding some vanilla white and orange to the earth green to provide some warm object source lighting to the top. Naturally, the closer we are to the lantern, the more concentrated I want the orange to be. I want to create quite a worn and textured finish here on the water bottle. I'm now returning to the hooded cloak, where I'm first pushing the warm object source lighting a little further. And for the left side, I'm going to mix some sky blue and some white into the deep red we used earlier. Before going any further, I've chosen to highlight the golden trim by increasing the amount of Naples Yellow in the base tone. For the highlight closest to the lantern, I'm also adding some vanilla white to the Naples Yellow. And for the cooler highlights on the left side of the figure, I've added some white and primary blue. Being quite a reflective surface, I'd expect these details to catch more of the coloured light compared to the softer fabric of the cloak. And here I'm freely using both the warm and cool tones to give the buckle a reflective appearance. I'm now hopping around a little, picking out some additional details and playing with some of the textures and highlights. Here I'm adding some scratchy texture to the straps on the left leg, once again with some blue and white added to the base tone. I'm also picking out the stitching on the water bottle. And I'm returning to expand the area of blue objects or slighting on the robes. Moving down to the boots, I began by sketching out some initial highlights with a purplish grey. And I'm trying out different intensities of orange to add some reflective object source lighting. I've also mixed some more greenish tints for the underside of the boot. I'm now just freely going back and forth a bit, playing around with the values until I'm happy with the overall look. For the handle of the dagger, I'm using the same golden tones we used for the trim of the robe. I'm also picking out these little buckles and painting the blade of the dagger. With all of the main areas now painted, I'm returning to push the blue object source lighting on the robes a little further until I'm happy with the overall balance. You can see I'm adding additional sky blue and white to the deep red to do this. I'm going a little less intense with the levels of blue the further we get from the hand. And I'm using some thinned intermediate tones to do a little blending. I'm now returning to the base to push the highlights and pick out some details, but keeping the overall ambience somewhat gloomy. This is mainly light moss green, tinted with some of the orange pigments. A little overbrushing here on the ground is a nice easy way to pick out the texture, and notice that I've incorporated a hint of the blue and orange object source lighting tones into my greens. Here I'm freely pushing one or two of the glinting highlights on the outfit. And as usual, I like to paint the rim of the base in black. I'm now returning to push the highlights on the purple leather a little further. And here I'm building up some additional texture on the water bottle. I'm also doing a bit of tidying and refining of the cloak. And once again, it's worth mentioning how important the black lining is. My last few refinements include boosting some of the orange tones, sharpening some of the glinting highlights, and smoothing out a couple of the softer transitions on the cloak. And this completes the witch. Thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you've enjoyed the video. As usual, you can find details of paints and products used in the video description, as well as links to where I can be found on social media and on Spotify. My sincerest thanks go to my kind patrons for funding this work. If you'd like to support what I do, feel free to hit the Patreon link to find out more. Join me again soon as we continue painting miniatures from Oathsworn into the Deepwood. Happy painting!